Shalom, welcome to another episode of Inspiration from Zion. I'm Jonathan Feldstein, and I have the privilege of being your host, coming to you from the Judean mountains here in Israel. I like to refer to it as the original Bible Belt. Inspiration from Zion is a program of the Genesis 123 Foundation, whose mission is to build bridges between Jews and Christians with Israel in ways that are new, unique, and meaningful. I pray that you will find this, all of those. Through this program, we're excited to connect you to people and stories in and relating to Israel to give you a window to look through, experiencing aspects of life here that you might not otherwise know about. We want this to be interactive, so please be in touch at inspirationfromzion@gmail.com and send along any questions and any comments about any topic anytime. Or you can follow us at genesis123.co or feel free to comment and like the episode on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Today, we're having a conversation about Israel from several thousand miles away, and it's important. And it's important because, as I had a conversation last week, I believe, or the week before, with our guest Don James and his wife Victoria about truth, about the battle for truth. This has become a front in the battle against Israel, and it's a front that is international, multinational, and across national borders. And today we're going to be speaking about a really disappointing incident that's very hot in terms of current events, and I want you to pay attention and share this widely, please, if only that we know what's going on as a matter of truth. We're going to get into the topic, but first let me introduce Don. And I want to say this. I only met Don by Zoom recently, but there are occasions that we have in life that when you meet somebody, you feel like you know that person. And I don't mean that only on an individual, warm, familial basis, but also because of who the person is and what that person represents. And in this case, Don James, let me just read from the bio so I do him proper justice. He served in the leadership of Bridges for Peace Canada since 2013, and the past 2 years serving in the capacity of national CEO. Prior to this, he's had careers as a Baptist minister, as a civil servant within the Manitoba Student Aid, and as a waiter. He grew up in Edmonton, Alberta as a pastor's kid and received a BA from the University of Alberta, as well as several years of study in music. I didn't know this about you, Don, voice and opera, although you certainly do have a robust voice. Maybe you'll give us a little bit of it, how it sounds singing. Following his marriage to Victoria, they spent 3 years at McMaster Divinity College, where Don received his Master's of Divinity. Don and Victoria have lived for 41 years in Winnipeg, where they raised their 4 children, now with 6 grandchildren. And Victoria has established the Masterworks Dance Studio, which also has a major impact on the Christian arts. 30 years ago, Don spoke to them both separately about the centrality of Israel and in his purposes, in God's purposes, and how that impacted their lives. Both are now part of the leadership team at Bridges for Peace, and I got to meet Victoria in person in context of our incredible Root and Branch program to bring Christians to harvest olives here in the land. Don is passionate that Christians will recognize the times in which we live and will commit the resources, including financial, to God's purposes, and will be found faithful when Messiah comes to establish his kingdom here in Jerusalem. Both Don and Victoria find the opportunity to stand with Israel and the Jewish community of Canada immensely rewarding. Don, that last line, and I think sums up maybe why when we met by Zoom recently, I have that familiar feeling because you feel what you do as immensely rewarding, and from the reciprocal side, I feel like it's incredibly important, and we're united in that from opposite ends of or different ends. I don't know if it's opposite. Sometimes I say same sides of the coin, opposite sides of the same coin, but really we're all part of one. And if I can go to the root and branch metaphor from our program, one tree with us as the root, and you, of course, as the grafted in branches. And it's a delight to do this. You know, the conversation that we're having now came up as a result of our conversation last week, and it was just in passing. And you shared with me something that Victoria had shared about a video of yours. I'll take the link for that and put it in the notes here so people can also see you beyond this more formal setting. But we're talking today about what, as of now, as of the recording when we were having this conversation on the 15th of June 2026, what may be in 2 weeks the imminent opening of a very disruptive, very damaging, very dangerous exhibit right there I didn't even know Canada had such a thing. I don't know how many countries have such things at the Canadian Museum for Human Rights. You want to talk about what's the issue?
I certainly would be happy to, Jonathan, and it's a it's a real encouragement that you are taking an interest in this from Israel, from thousands of miles away. Uh, the diaspora is struggling with anti-Semitism in very serious ways, and Canada is perhaps close to the top of the list in the seriousness of the struggle. And our Jewish community is feeling very, very threatened by government actions, by campus actions, sometimes by church actions. And so to be on the side of Israel in this incredible struggle has been an immense privilege for Victoria and I. As I say, it started 30 years ago. I grew up in an Israel forgetful church, not hearing about Israel really in terms of present significance at all, just Bible stories that were kind of part of our past, but not present or future. So to realize that God is bringing the Jewish people home and that there's a tremendous pushback against the Jewish people in our time and a narrative created that this Jews are doing something wrong by coming back to their ancestral homeland. To be part of that struggle is really become central to our lives as individuals personally, and we get to do that as part of our calling and our jobs with Bridges for Peace Canada.
Yeah. I'm so glad you
So
mentioned that, by the way, because I neglected to say sufficiently how much, not just for you and Victoria, and what you're doing and what we're going to be talking about now, and looking forward to seeing you in person in the spring when I come to visit, but also Bridges for Peace, one of the most significant organizations in the last half century, fulfilling that mandate of Christians standing with Israel. So I thank you for representing them and for everyone along the last half century rather, or more, who've been part of that.
it's been a privilege, and Winnipeg is the national office for Canada, which is one of seven nations plus Israel, which make up the Bridges for Peace family. So
Yeah,
to get to the exhibit at the museum, apparently for a number of years, the Palestinian community of Manitoba has been pressuring the museum to have content relating to what we would call their narrative. And narrative is a loaded term because it doesn't always coincide with truth. But in the last year, it came to light that the museum was preparing to launch what they call a Nakba exhibit,
yeah,
Palestine Uprooted, Past and Present, I think is the name of it. And the way the exhibit was described was very troubling because, first of all, it talked about the forced expulsion of the Palestinians in 1948, which we know is not even a half truth. It's just a fraction of truth. Some were forced, but the circumstances of the Palestinian and Arab war against Israel, the lack of acceptance of a state which they were offered, the pleas of Israel to stay makes forced expulsion just absolutely pathetic, as a way of describing what happened to the Palestinians in 1948. And along with that term, they also said that it wouldn't be historical. It would just be personal narratives. And I thought, oh boy, they're actually acknowledging that they're not going to give us the historical context of what happened. They're going to share stories of people who's lost their homes. And certainly many people lost their homes.
Who
But the
lost their homes and
question
blamed
of
the Jews.
well, that was the other part of the missing context was the 800,000, maybe more, Jewish people who lost their homes in the Middle East
Right.
between 1948 and 1951, perhaps. So there was a kind of a population exchange, and the forcing of expulsion was much more of the Jewish people and not the Palestinian people. So this is a national museum. It was founded by a Jewish philanthropic family named Asper. Izzy Asper, who's now of blessed memory, had the vision. He hoped it would be like a Yad Vashem of Canada. And there is a Holocaust exhibit. It doesn't dominate the museum by any stretch. When the museum needed to uh, collaborate with the government, the doors were just flung open to all kinds of other human rights issues. And so it's anything but a Holocaust museum now. But to think that a false narrative of what happened in the founding of the State of Israel was going to be in a national museum and school classes were going to come and tour and it was going to be online. The concern, and it's very, very real, is that this is going to foster anti-Semitism. It's going to accentuate the lie that there was something illegitimate about the founding of the State of Israel in 1948. And that is a completely false narrative. So as a Christian community, we've been doing all we can to raise the alarm. I've written quite a few letters to the minister responsible for museums in Canada and created that video, as you mentioned, and trying to encourage the Jewish community as they take action. And so we were thrilled when Shirat Hadin entered the fray, the Israel legal organization, and sent a demand letter to the museum saying basically
Sure.
cease and desist this exhibit until it can be rectified and the
Right.
true story told. Sometimes it's cast in terms of both sides being told. I don't agree that there's both sides, that two narratives need to be told. I think just the truth needs to be told. It's truth is not subject to my truth and your truth in my understanding of the world. There's a story of what happened historically, and we need to get to the bottom of it.
I like how you frame that, and you're reminding me of the remarkable visit I had to in Dallas in 2022. It's a place I had always wanted to go to. I forget what the name of the museum is, but the book depository, the building from which it's believed that Lee Harvey Oswald was a shooter or the shooter in the
Mhm.
assassination of President Kennedy back in 1963. And when you go into, and maybe I don't know if it's an appropriate analogy. So let me have some leeway. Anyway, I'm the host. I get to have leeway if I want. Um, but the many narratives of the assassination of President Kennedy, one shooter, two shooters, cover up, who was behind it. There are many things, and I was so interested to go through the museum and see that they honestly addressed. I don't know if it was all of the issues, but a wide range of the issues, talking about the conspiracies, one shooter, two shooters, and everything that went with it, and Lee Harvey Oswald and his being shot down just shortly afterward by Jack Ruby. It would be refreshing to have an honest conversation about that, because I do remember when you and Victoria and I were speaking recently, I alluded to the fact that we talk about use today the term Palestinian. Um, when my father was born here in 1937, he was a Palestinian because until that day in May of 1948, ironically, actually, the letter that's in front of me that was written by Shurat Hadin was written on May 14th of this year, happens to be the day corresponding in 1948 on which Israel declared independence. Until May 14th of 1948, my father was called a Palestinian. And then on May 14th or May 15th, when Israel came into being after the British mandate ended. And all of these are really important aspects that people have to understand for a perspective of just academic and intellectual honesty. Then he became an Israeli. And then the term Palestinian, ironically, went into hibernation until the year I was born, when the PLO was born and the Soviet KGB. And we spoke about this also. And should anyone want it, I wrote a six-part series recently about the Nakba and uncovering that. So I'm very interested, and I want to come back to the fact that the Canadian Museum for Human Rights was established and largely funded by a Jewish person. I'm wondering if you know anything about that, because it just makes me curious for what would be the intention if he wanted a Holocaust memorial of some capacity, but why was it not called a Holocaust museum like there is in Washington and in many other places, but a museum of human rights? Um, Down the road, it allows for the abuse that's happening now. Do you know anything about that?
The key is that it was quite an expensive project. I think $600 million to build a glorious building. He wanted it to be a world-class architectural marvel, sort of along the lines of the Sydney Opera House or the
Wow.
Bilbao Museum, and I think he succeeded. I don't have a picture of it, but if you go online and Google CMHR, you'll see quite a glorious building. So it was expensive, and there was a choice made in retrospect, a choice with really difficult consequences to ask for government funding. And as soon as the government got involved, then political pressures came. I think one of the first things that happened was that the Ukrainian community came along and said, well, what about the Holodomor? You can't just have the Holocaust, you need to also have a major exhibit for the Holodomor, which was granted. And not that there wasn't a lot of Ukrainian suffering, but the Holocaust is unique. And Izzy Asper's hope was to demonstrate the significance of that event, that terrible Holocaust event. But once government funding was welcomed, there was an inability to say no to
Got it.
other pressures, other groups. And so it's become quite I won't say a dog's breakfast, but uh, and I don't even agree that all of the causes that are represented there are actually human rights. I think sometimes there's uh, morality has been flipped on its head in our generation, and sometimes we proclaim human rights as things that aren't right. But anyway, it the key was that it wasn't remaining private. And
Got
so
it.
the
Okay.
control was lost and the board became a political appointed board. And therefore the Jewish uh, focus was lost and became just one of. And now, of course, with the Palestinian movement, which, as you say, started in the year of your birth, the year of my high school graduation. I'm a little older than you are.
You wear it
Um,
well, Don. You wear it well.
Thank you. Praise God. Anyway, so now we have an almost unstoppable pressure,
Yes.
of telling what I think is a false narrative in a federal museum.
That's accepted as truth. And we, to be honest, I don't know too many Israelis or people on the pro-Israel side who won't be honest about it. Of course, there were Arabs who were displaced forcefully, but without going into the whole issue, That's a fraction of what took place. And again, I'll call people to, I don't know where they all were published, but my series of 6 articles, you can go to my Substack, Jonathan Feldstein, and read the 6 articles in succession. An unfair question, Don, because we didn't prepare for the conversation at all, but I asked you before we started recording if there was an action item. And because the potential opening of the exhibit is imminent, and that's why we're having this conversation now. When you mentioned that you have been in touch with the government minister, I also happened to glance for and notice only now for the first time at the copy of the demand letter that was sent to the museum. We have 2 email addresses. Now, I'm not gonna unless someone tells me between now and when these episodes become live that I should put their emails for people to respond and send their own messages to the director of the museum, to the board of the museum, to whatever government ministers in charge. Without getting into that, do you think that that would be appropriate, helpful?
I don't think I do. I agree. I think there's no reason not to keep the pressure on to let the government know that many people are concerned. And so I would certainly put Mark Miller's email up there and Isha Khan, who's the
Okay,
CEO of the museum, and let
okay,
people continue to message them.
okay, great. I'll ask
But
you then
you
to
asked
give me.
about the action point, and the action point of the Shurat Hadin letter was really they said all legal remedies will be taken if you don't respond to this letter as we ask. And the main ask was that the exhibit be halted, be
Correct.
postponed until it could be renovated, until it could be uh, looked at by experts from, we'll say both sides, I guess,
Yes.
but so that there would be context in this, if it's going to be told at all, this story, once you say we're going to tell the story of the Nakba, it's like um, it's a fairy tale in some sense, and so
You've leapt off the edge and down that slippery slope. Once you're telling that story, you already are identifying yourself
yeah.
in a
So
position of
anyway, the point
non-truth.
of action is uh, stop the exhibit or we're going to seek a court injunction, I think would be the main legal remedy. And there are other, I think, uh, efforts in Canada to prepare for a legal battle. I don't know how it's going to be led. I'm not privy to that, but
Well,
that is,
my mother wanted me to be a lawyer. I disappointed her on that. So I can't help on that level, but on a grassroots kind of level, if you'll provide me Mark Miller's email, we'll make those public. I wanted to go to the Shurat Hadin letter. First of all, I've always had tremendous respect for what they do, and when I read the letter, it's 7 pages. It's very, very, very well done, very well structured. In every level. I went through it, I made notes, and my notes have notes. But one of the things that I have to, even before jumping into what the points are that you just alluded to, one thing, and because you know me and my heart, is in building bridges between Jews and Christians, something that jumped out multiple times was a reference to the Jewish community and how the Jewish community has been sidelined. And when I read that, I thought of my friends Don and Victoria James. I thought of Bridges for Peace Canada. I thought of all of the Christians in Canada and around the world who support Israel and the Jewish people. And it just, I'm not looking to make a point. Oh, maybe I specifically am, but it makes me frustrated that the Jewish community has not yet matured to a point where this is a Jewish issue. It's not a Jewish issue. It's a moral issue. It's an historical, factual issue. It's a Zionist issue. You're not Jewish and I'm not Christian, but we're both Zionists, and we both support the state of Israel. I think you can acknowledge, as I do, as a citizen of the state, that the state of Israel and the government of Israel and even some of the people of Israel have their flaws, and we can speak freely and openly about that. But I wonder if when you see something like this, as supportive as you are, does is it dismaying that they're referring to the Jewish community and not building a wider tent that encompasses you and Bridges for Peace?
You know, that didn't strike me as inappropriate, frankly. Uh,
Okay.
but I mean, when I hear Jewish community, I almost feel part of the Jewish
Okay.
community here in
Good.
Winnipeg. We have 13,000 Jews in Winnipeg, and they have welcomed us as supporters of Israel and the Jewish community. So um, I don't I actually feel part of it. So maybe that's why it didn't
Okay.
strike me.
Good.
But it
Good.
is a truth issue. It's not a Jewish issue. I mean, you when can we what other nation are we going to call illegitimate when their enemies create a false narrative about their founding? You know, this is wicked, and so it's a matter of truth.
So that goes, first of all, I love your answer because that shows your heart, and I concur with you on that. And thank you for allowing me to ask that. So let me read from the letter because they say it so well. Um, as described by the Canadian Museum of Human Rights for Human Rights, and in media coverage, the exhibit will focus. I'm reading directly from the Shurat Hadin letter on a particular Palestinian narrative concerning the events of 1948 and the creation of the State of Israel, presented through personal narratives, artifacts, and contemporary imagery, including materials that appears intended to connect those historical events to current conflicts. And then the next paragraph says, not doesn't allude, it says specifically, um, here's where the first use of the term I think of Jewish is that I just raised. As you are aware, a broad range of commentators and Jewish institutions, so you fit into the commentators, have raised serious concerns that the exhibit as presently conceived may exceed the statutory mandate of the museum and risks presenting a one-sided, politicized, and historically incomplete narrative lacking balance and scholarly content. That's going to the heart of it. It's not saying you're an anti-Semite. It's not saying you're liars. It's saying we expect truth from a Canadian government institution. Am I on point?
Absolutely. And so they go on their first um, their their first reference legally is to the Museums Act and how the Museums Act is being contravened, that they feel this exhibit is a breach of the Museums Act. Um, First of all, by going beyond the Canadian context, this is a Canadian museum, but secondly, presenting the founding of the Jewish state as a human rights abuse in
Right,
itself
right.
and transforming the museum from an educational institution grounded in human rights into a platform for partisan political advocacy, which is something that the Museums Act of Canada, which this museum came under in 2008, forbids. That's not what this museum is about, is to be a partisan political tool.
And then in doing so, and especially in the environment in which you noted, and especially in Canada, the word that I made in the margin in the first page of it is all of that is incitement. That's incitement to violence. It's not that the museum, I'm sure that no one's, well, I'm not sure that no one's intention in this exhibit is not to incite violence because part of the Nakba narrative to which I allude in my articles is indeed a physical response to the state of Israel. It's not just yelling from the river to the sea, but physically acting in what they call resistance. So there's a very real and present danger, specifically to the Jewish community, but not exclusively, that this exhibit, as planned, will create incitement. What's been the conversation there in Winnipeg about how to deal with that?
Well, that is a serious concern, and that is kind of the bottom line. Like, why are we so concerned? Is because this isn't just an academic matter. This leads to violence, both verbal violence, but also physical violence. And the people that the museum relied upon for the content of this exhibit are the same people in Manitoba who are inciting violence in Manitoba. Uh,
Okay.
the CMHR assembled a Palestinian Content Advisory Network, and one of the members of that is a leader of the Palestinian community who publicly calls Zionism a disease that must be destroyed and is behind many of the uh, demonstrations and really hate fests that go on at Jewish institutions and Jewish events. We have in Winnipeg, even our own events, we don't publish the location because that will attract this kind of uh, demonstration, which is not even legal, and yet the police don't stop it. These are people calling from the river to the sea and for the destruction of the Jewish people. And so that is what will happen if this exhibit goes forward and people are convinced that Israel is an illegitimate nation and that they need, for the good of the world, to see it destroyed.
So
That's where we're at.
you just hit the nail on the head, emphasizing the point I made earlier in terms of it being about the Jewish community, because you said that even we, and somebody who's not paying close attention to the fact that you're a Christian leader, and we being bridges for peace, can't has unfortunately had to succumb to the reality of many, if indeed not most, Jewish organizations in North America, that you can't just put out an invitation for an event and say, "Hey, we're doing such and such on Saturday night at 8:30 at night. Come on out." And give the address and a phone number or email to RSVP. We have to keep these venues secret. And if you're mentioning the member of the advisory council who's called for the destruction of the Zionist disease, then you and I, as carriers, if you will, of that disease, are also in their crosshairs, and that makes the threat physical to us, the incitement, to be very clear and present, doesn't it?
It does, and we're quite a long way down the road in that movement of violence toward the Jewish people and people who stand with the Jewish people.
The you were alluding to something I wanted to, I'm just so fascinated following this very well done demand letter. Uh, the 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 fact that it is a violation indeed, or that it must comply with the Canadian Human Rights Act and the Human Rights Code. But the points that are made, I'm going to read them in order, even though one of them we just excuse me, emphasized there's a claim that the exhibit delegitimizes the Jewish people's right of self-determination in their historic homeland, fails to meaningfully present mainstream Jewish and Zionist perspectives. That's very important because it's not just Jewish, but Zionist, and therefore you and other Christian Zionists also need to have a voice. You're part of the dynamic of Canada. The third point is minimizes or erases Jewish suffering, displacement, and historical experiences. And this one I circled and wrote a bunch of exclamation points next to it, provides a platform for narratives that may normalize hostility toward Jews or the Jewish state. Now, again, I would add Zionists because you're a proud Zionist. You're not Jewish, although you feel like you are. But you're threatened all the same. That you can't have a Bridges for Peace event open there with inviting Jonathan Feldstein or any other speaker from Israel without at least potentially risking backlash.
Right, right. We had 25, the hotel where we had our recent conference received 2,500 phone calls and emails asking them not to host our event.
Wow.
And happily, the hotel was owned by a Jewish person, and she told the staff just to ignore it. And they actually put our event up on the seventh floor in a beautiful ballroom to make us a little more inaccessible. But the threat was actually carried out. And the first night of the conference, we had demonstrators on the street. We had several police cars there to try to make sure that things did not uh, get more serious. And uh, and that's a Christian event that's
Correct.
standing with Israel.
And all what we've seen in the last year, 2 years, whether in Bondi Beach in Sydney or at the which museum even was it? I forgive me, I don't remember, in Washington D.C., where two of the staff of the Israel embassy were shot and assassinated on the street, and others who have been attacked. We've seen that all it takes is one crazy person who's incited by this Nakba narrative and the delegitimizing of Israel to say anyone attending such and such an event or going to such and such a synagogue or even going to a particular church that might fly an Israeli flag is legitimate fair game because of the, as you said, the acceptance of the view of people who are on the advisory committee that Zionism is a disease that needs to be rooted out. Nobody from the other side, nobody from our side is ever saying that. We're not saying kill the Arabs. We're not, that doesn't exist. It's a very one-sided and imbalanced threat that should properly offend anyone who has biblical Judeo-Christian values and Western values of democracy.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We are pro-Palestinian and we want the best for Arab people, whether we agree that there is actually a Palestinian nation from time immemorial, which your birth wasn't time immemorial. The Palestinian narrative created in the 60s, as we've
Yeah,
said a couple of times. So we are pro-Palestinian and we want the best and for all peoples. And the problem is when Palestinians become pawns in a movement, whether it's a religious movement or a racial Arab movement that wants to uh, delegitimize the Jewish people and delegitimize their state, that's when they suffer. But we're definitely sad for that suffering and trying to oppose that narrative that makes them pawns and for so many of them thinking that their life's work is to kill the Jews, you know?
correct. That becomes their national narrative and the narrative that exists in opposition to the sovereignty of Israel as this Jewish state. Whether they believe that we have biblical ties here or not, I mean, that's also kind of an historical difficult thing to deny. And I get a chuckle often when I see people post on social media pictures of coins like I have in my desk drawer here that say Palestine 1927 or Palestine 1937, the year my father was born, but they neglect and therefore somehow the fact that someone minted coins that say the words Palestine in Hebrew, excuse me, in English and in Arabic proves that there was a Palestine, but in fact those coins also say Palestine in Hebrew with and I'm sure you know this, with the Hebrew letters Aleph and Yud in parentheses next to the Hebrew, standing for the Hebrew phrase Eretz Yisrael or land of Israel. And surely, if there were a Palestinian Arab state, or any Arab state, or any Muslim state, they would not be giving credence to the biblical use of the name. So, therefore, the coins that they show are just one of those silly narratives that they use to try to prove a myth, then debunk it at the same time. I'm curious. Go ahead. You're going to say
Well, I
something.
didn't know that the coins had Arabic on them. I thought it was just Hebrew and English, but they were produced by Jews, right?
By the British. No, they were
Oh,
British
by the
coins.
British. Okay. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Let me see if I can find some for you. I'll bring them when I come to visit.
Okay.
I have one from 1937 because it's the year that my father was born. But yeah, there are pictures all over the internet, and people have suddenly decided to plant their flag in the ground and say this proves that there was a Palestine, which is so silly. And I don't have a good even equally silly analogy. But silly is a kind word, and yet we're coming back to a narrative that, at its very core, because it portrays the creation of Israel as an inherently criminal, racist, colonialist, or genocidal, that anyone who's going to see that exhibit is going to come away, can't help but come away with that feeling that if school children, there should be a PG-13 sign on there where if they're going to bring kids, parents need to give permission maybe this should be part of what should happen. A disclaimer that their children are going to see materials that are not only factually and historically incorrect, but may incite their children to violence. That would be profound.
That would be that would be appropriate. I don't think it's in the museum's plans, but that is the reality, is that when people see a distortion of what happened, then they're going to think, oh, this uh, adds to my understanding that the Jews are a dangerous people, not a people who are bringing light to the world and tikkun olam, which is how I experience the Jewish people, and so that PG-13 warning would be more than appropriate.
Indeed, there should be. You have a child can't buy cigarettes and smoke. I assume that's the case in Canada as well, because that's harmful to your health. Ingesting Palestinian Nakba narrative is also not just harmful to your own health, it's harmful to the health of other people. Very, very dangerous. What can you tell me, Don? What's been the response and action specifically within the Jewish community? Because you are close, you are grafted in, not just
Yeah, yeah.
covenantally, but also in the community in which you live. How are people dealing with this?
There's a lot of ferment, and Jewish organizations for months now have been ad addressing the museum, saying you promised to consult with us, and you only consulted with radical Jewish groups who represent almost no one, like Independent Jewish Voices and a group called United Jewish People's Order, which was expelled from the Canadian Jewish Congress in 1951. So
Wow,
that's how illegitimate
older
they
than we
are in
both
terms
are.
of a mainstream Jewish position. But that's who was consulted by the museum. And so organizations like CJA and the Jewish Heritage Foundation of Manitoba have addressed the museum and said, you promised consultation and you did not give it. And so they've addressed the minister. I think that a representative of the Asper family actually met with the minister and been crying out for a stop to this roller coaster, but the claim was made that there was consultation, but it was only with these radicals, and so we seem to be heading towards a June 27th opening. But there has been a lot of concern in the Jewish community, and I know that even the national group Tafsik uh, has a lot of legal counsels, and when I asked them if they were involved, they said yes, we are looking at various legal options, including supporting Shurat Hadin. So I'm not privy to the details, but certainly between me and the Lord, we are asking for a legal injunction to be issued so that this June 27th opening will not happen.
What can happen uh, before even a legal injunction. You reference the government minister, who Mark Miller. Who is he? What is he minister of? And what and can he do something presumably under his authority?
He does have the authority. He could say to the board, you need to put a stop to this. But, I don't, I've seen different titles, culture, immigration. All I know is that Canadian National Museums come under his authority. So it's Mark, MARC dot Miller at parl for parliament dot gc dot ca.
Okay, we'll put that in the notes and ask people
Hmm.
to express themselves to him. Um, has there been any, as far as you're aware, has there been any interest, any movement, any concern among government authorities in Canada about this? It's not just, it happens to be in Winnipeg, but it's a national museum and it's establishing a national precedent.
I would say it hasn't got national traction, among parliamentarians, although we've addressed many parliamentarians. So it's been more of a Manitoba issue, a Winnipeg issue.
That's interesting because it's federally funded. It's not. I don't know. I should have researched it because it was a curiosity when I read the letter for the first time that there is such a museum, a Canadian Museum of Human Rights. I don't know if there are any other countries that have such things, but one would think that while yeah, it's a museum and you could theoretically draw you can widen the tent and have it be big. You don't want to do something that you're going to burn down your own tent. And it seems that that's be potentially being done with the complicity of Canadian national authorities, no?
Yeah, that's right. It is, by the way, the only national museum that's not in Ottawa. So
Oh,
most of the national museums, military and others, are in the capital of Canada. But because of Izzy Asper's determination, uh, he chose to put it here in Winnipeg.
and that's very interesting. I wonder if maybe if it were in Ottawa, that it might be more in the spotlight, because Winnipeg is somewhat further out.
Yeah, we're kind of the hinterland. So probably you're right. It would
Interesting.
cause a bigger stir if it was in the capital.
Well, let's hope we can get some of our viewers and followers to send their own note to Mark Miller and express their concern, and maybe we have now, as of today, 12 days, if my math is correct, before the exhibit opening. So a lot can happen.
That would be
Um,
wonderful, and we need to do what we can do. We
Good.
can't do more than we can do, but that people can do. And also, you can write to Isha Khan, the
Director.
director of, and I'll give you that too for
I have that. I have that on the original email. That's what struck me is I only paid attention to it when you mentioned Mark Miller and you being in touch with him. Then I realized that wait a minute, I have Isha Khan and another email. I'm going to put those in the notes and all the follow up so people who are moved by this can can
I'm
express
going
their
to just
concern.
share a little bit of a story because I,
Please.
being in Winnipeg and having this uh, Israel's Battle for Truth conference, uh, resulted in us bringing a man named Itamar Marcus to Winnipeg as our main speaker, and he's founder of Palestinian Media Watch, and so he understands what happened in 1948 very well. And so I reached out to the museum and I said, "You've got an expert coming to town. Would you meet with him?" And they didn't take me up on that. They did send their main researcher to one of his sessions, and happily, it was the one in which he played a video of several Palestinians telling the story of how their own leaders told them to leave. to get out of
Oh, yeah, I
the
saw that.
way of the Arab incoming Arab forces so they could make a clean sweep of the Jews. And the last person in Itamar Marcus's series of testimonies of Arab incitement to leave was Mahmoud Abbas, who
What
was
did he say? He's
he
now the
was
current president of the
current
Palestinian Authority.
president of
What
the
was
Palestinian Authority, and he was in Sfat, and the Arab leaders encouraged his family to leave Sfat, and he did. And so I found that quite remarkable to see in living color how there were testimonies of Palestinians saying that no, it wasn't the Jews who forced us to leave, it was our own leaders. And
right?
Mahmoud Abbas himself admitting that publicly.
Admitting that, I don't know what year that was, but he's currently the president of the Palestinian Authority, going on, what do they say? He's serving the 22nd or 23rd year of his 4-year term. But you don't, if there is a Palestinian leader, he is the Palestinian leader, and to have that under his authority, and someone from the museum, at least not to say, hey, there's something wrong with this narrative, that we at least need to be intellectually honest about, um,
Hmm.
underscores perhaps some intellectual dishonesty of the museum itself, I guess.
I'm afraid so. I'm afraid so.
Interesting.
I also read the report of an Arab group in 1980, Arab leaders. I don't remember their name, but they said that 64 or it might have been 68% of all Arabs left Palestine in 1948 without even seeing an IDF soldier.
Yes, yes, I've
You've
heard
heard
that
that?
statistic as
And that's
well.
an Arab source. That's not an Israeli source. That's an Arab source.
By the way, in the spirit of being intellectually honest, the word Nakba in Arabic means catastrophe. You and I think, can probably, and probably everyone listening can fairly agree that those who refer to themselves as Palestinian Arabs today had a catastrophe. The catastrophe they choose is the existence of the state of Israel, the very birth of the state. But the real catastrophe, and you alluded to it earlier, is that they were offered a state then and subsequently. And at no point have they actually made the hard decision to live and coexist with us. Whereas the foundational documents, the Declaration of Independence of the State of Israel and historic record, show that the Jewish leadership of the pre state and then the state, as soon as that document was signed, called for the Arabs to stay and coexist and build together. So sure, did hundreds of thousands of people get displaced? Were they treated horribly where they ended? Did they get to come back and reconquer their homes and the Jews' homes, what they were promised would happen? No. And one can legitimately call that a catastrophe if you want. But you can't put it all on the very existence of the state of Israel, because that then is genocidal from the other side.
Hmm. So the catastrophe is real, but it's self-inflicted from every side, offered a state, refusing it, um,
Getting thrown into refugee.
making war
Yep,
on the Jews,
yep,
inviting your neighbors or accepting the 5 Arab countries that attacked. It's all a self-inflicted catastrophe, and so we can sympathize with people who may not have been driving those events, but to blame Israel and to say
right,
that there's something illegitimate about the
right.
Israeli state, which has thrived, and in which the Arabs who stayed have thrived. I think 160,000 Arabs did not leave, and they now number 2 million, and they're doing quite well.
Oh, the citizens of the state of Israel. That's correct. That's
That's
correct.
right. They're,
100%.
the ones who
Uh,
stayed did not have a catastrophe. They thrived.
Correct. Well, very, very, very well said. Good point. Don, I want to begin to wrap up. I have so many pages here. My desk, I alluded to the fact that my mother would have liked for me to be a lawyer. Today, my desk looks like that of a lawyer because I've got all the legal brief and your bio and all kinds of other things in front of me. It was very interesting. I'm not going to go through it all, but at the conclusion of a demand letter, you state your demands, and it's maybe actually, do I have a moment? Yeah, let's let people know what we're demanding. Immediately suspend, and I want your comment on this, but I think it was the last one that really jumped out to me. Immediately suspend all work on public promotion of the Palestine Uprooted Nakba Past and Present exhibit in its current form. By the way, those are operative words. I'm not a lawyer, but I can catch those last three words of the sentence. In its current form doesn't mean shutting down the exhibit. It simply means in its current form. That's important coming from a legal perspective. Commission an independent legal review by counsel with expertise in the Museums Act, Canadian and Manitoba human rights legislation, and defamation law to assess the exhibit and associated programming for compliance with applicable statutory and common law obligations. Three, conduct a comprehensive review of the exhibit concept and content for compliance with international museum standards. That's very important, including applicable ICOM guidelines concerning balance, impartiality, and contested historic narratives. Again, all of this makes me have all that much more respect for Sharat Hadin because it's such a cogent way of explaining things. Establish a genuinely balanced advisory and review process that includes recognized Jewish communal organizations, historians representing diverse perspectives concerning the Arab-Israel conflict, and experts on anti-Semitism and hate speech. Number five, publicly clarify that the CMHR does not regard the creation of the State of Israel in and of itself as a human rights violation, and that any future exhibit will reflect the complexity of the events of 1948, including the experience of Jewish refugees and survivors. Six, preserve and safeguard all, this is important, very important. Preserve and safeguard all documents, communications, electronically stored information, drafts, memoranda, and records relating to the conception, planning, development, and implementation of the exhibit, including records concerning the creation of and operation of any Palestinian Advisory Committee, and records concerning events hosted in partnership with Islamic Relief Canada. Please be advised, it continues, that any destruction, deletion, or alteration of potentially relevant records following receipt of this notice may give rise to serious legal consequences. And the seventh item, and I think to me this was really the most salient, because it's a big shot across a very wide bow. Notify all relevant insurers of potential claims and confirm whether any applicable directors and officers' insurance coverage may respond to claims arising from the matters addressed therein. That says all of the members of the board are potentially individually liable. What can you add or highlight on that as we wrap up, Don?
Well, those are a lot of demands, and I've been on some boards, and we make sure we have insurance in case we're sued. And Sharat Hadin is being clear that there could be some liability for the board for allowing this dangerous exhibit to go forward. So well done, Sharat Hadin.
Right.
And I just
It
want to
theoretically,
allude.
go ahead.
There was a number of legal parameters that are being contravened here, and one of them that I'd never heard of was the Defamation Act. And that was referred to here, not just Human Rights Acts and Museums Acts, but there is a Defamation Act. And so that is one ground for opposing this exhibit, is that it is
Defamatory.
contravening a Defamation Act, clearly
Right.
defaming the state of Israel and by extension, the Jewish people.
And therefore breeding to incitement, which goes to the issue of insurance, because if something, God forbid, should happen to you or someone in the Jewish community as a consequence of this exhibit, then the legal connection is that the museum and its board of directors can be liable.
Okay, okay. I wasn't making that connection, but truly, if something happens and it can be shown that someone was influenced by this exhibit, then then there would be a liability there for such an eventuality.
Certainly to the point that members of the board of the museum might say to the director, "Hey, I don't want to be hassled, even if we have the directors and officers insurance. You should not do this because otherwise I'm going to resign from your board because I don't want to run the risk of this hateful thing following its unfortunate logical course of defamation and incitement."
Mhm.
Don, I always like to wrap up my conversations with offering my guest, in this case you, any last thoughts before I just do the concluding announcements. We've talked about a lot, and I'm really grateful that we connected recently and that this came up just as a matter of fact, and we're having this conversation specifically today in time to take some action. What else do you want people to know? uh, or from the perspective personally, from Bridges for Peace, as a Manitoba resident, excuse me, as a Winnipeg resident. Uh, tell us
I'm going to
what's
take
the
a
most.
leap, a flying leap away from this particular threat to the broader situation. And I just returned from Saskatchewan with my wife, where she gave a message uh, from Jeremiah 16, in which the scriptures say that what God is doing today on the earth in bringing the Jewish people home is bigger than the Exodus. And so I just want uh, my Christian viewers to know that they need to, if they don't already recognize that what is going on in the earth today, in the return of the Jews to their homeland, and the resistance by God's enemies to that return is very, very big, bigger than the Exodus. Check out Jeremiah 16
Wow.
and Jeremiah 23, where Jeremiah's scribe repeated this declaration, word for word, that no longer will God be known as the God who brought the Israelites out of Egypt. He'll be known as the God who brought them back from the north country and from all the countries where he had scattered them for the sake of his holy name. And so
Amen.
I just urge Christians to recognize the times in which we're in and to stand with God's purposes for the Jewish people.
Don, I couldn't have asked you to summarize all of this better. I thank you, for Victoria, for what you do, for Bridges for Peace Canada, and of course, the institution that's headquartered here for half a century, Bridges for Peace. Some of my
Well, thank
greatest
you for
friends.
taking an interest in Winnipeg and Canada. This is a real battlefront. You know, we are among the worst uh, nations on the earth today in terms of how we are defending the Jewish people. We just had a national committee appointed to uh, deal with anti-Semitism, and the members of that committee included two pro-Hamas supporters, a cabinet minister and a lawyer who had defended universities for allowing pro-Hamas demonstrations. So Canada is in serious trouble, and appreciate you highlighting what's going on here, Jonathan.
To be continued. Everyone who's following now up until June 27th, you'll get your points of action and the emails and that you need to write to here in the notes and also subsequently. But if you want to know what's going on, as always, as we do this as part of a dialogue, please do be in touch at inspirationfromzion@gmail.com. With again, thanks to Don for taking the time and the tremendous leadership and insightfulness from there. I also want, as we conclude, always to thank our sponsors. First of all, Priscilla Flory, who in my house is known as our bonus mother. When my mother and my wife's mother died 6 weeks apart 20 years ago, Priscilla not purposefully stepped in, but became the closest. And Priscilla, by the way, is a Christian woman who's connected to Bridges for Peace. It's through Bridges for Peace that we met. In fact, Priscilla has stepped in and become a cornerstone of our family, and it's only through us so far that she, in fact, has great grandchildren. So we're always grateful to Priscilla personally and for her support of the projects of the Genesis 123 Foundation, and also special thanks to the Coin family as well for their meaningful sponsorship. Inspiration from Zion and all of the Genesis 123 Foundation programs are made possible by donations. So please consider joining us to help continue the dialogue and build bridges. If you'd like to sponsor an episode in honor or memory of a loved one or special occasion, please be in touch at inspirationfromzion@gmail.com. And as always, we'd love to hear your comments and questions, especially questions about traditional Judaism for our Ask the Rabbi programs. Please share this with others who will also find it of interest, and continue to join us right here where we bring you more meaningful conversations about unique topics relating to Israel that you won't hear anywhere else. Wherever you are in the world, I pray that you and your loved ones are all safe and healthy, and I send my blessings from right here in the Judean mountains. God bless you.